The historic Kennedy Caucus Room in the Russell Senate Office Building hummed with activity as congressional staffers, journalists, and education advocates gathered for the annual Federal Education Policy Conference. The elegant wood-paneled room had witnessed countless moments of American political history, from the Watergate hearings to Supreme Court confirmation testimonies. Today, however, it would witness something different, a moment of genuine recognition that would transcend partisan politics. Senator Patty Murray, chair of the Senate Education Committee and the highest-ranking woman in Senate leadership, approached the podium with her characteristic measured stride. Known for her substantive policy focus rather than political theater, Murray was expected to deliver remarks about the bipartisan education bill that had recently passed. Instead, the veteran Washington senator looked across the room and departed from her prepared text. Before I address today's policy agenda, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of someone whose dedication to educational opportunity deserves our attention, Murray said, her voice carrying the quiet authority earned through decades of public service. The camera panned to show Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated among her colleagues, her expression shifting from polite attention to genuine surprise. Representative Crockett's leadership on the Education and Workforce Committee has demonstrated what public service should be about, not seeking the spotlight, but focusing on substantive results that improve American lives. The room fell silent as everyone recognized they were witnessing something increasingly rare in Washington, a senior leader from one chamber offering unsolicited recognition to a junior member from another chamber, not for political calculation, but out of genuine respect for meaningful achievement. What would unfold over the next hour would remind everyone present why public service matters, and how principled leadership can inspire the next generation of American leaders. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more moments where genuine public service transcends political division. To understand the significance of this moment of recognition, we need to understand the distinct but parallel paths these two women took to public service. Patty Murray's journey began far from the corridors of power. The daughter of a World War II veteran who ran a five-and-dime store, Murray grew up in Bothell, Washington, learning the value of hard work and community. When her father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she witnessed firsthand how illness could devastate a family financially, an experience that would later shape her healthcare advocacy. Murray's entry into politics came not from ambition, but from necessity. As a parent volunteer teaching preschool, she traveled to the state capitol to advocate against cuts to a parent-child education program. When a state senator dismissed her as just a mom in tennis shoes, Murray transformed the intended insult into a campaign slogan that would carry her from school board to the United States Senate in 1992. Senator Murray never forgot why she entered public service, noted political analyst Jennifer Lawless. She's built her career not on inflammatory rhetoric or grandstanding, but on substantive policy work that directly impacts families and communities. Over her 30 years in the Senate, Murray had earned respect from colleagues across the political spectrum for her focus on education, healthcare, veterans issues, and workforce development. Rather than seeking cable news appearances, she had dedicated herself to the often unglamorous work of crafting legislation that could actually pass in a divided Congress. Jasmine Crockett's path to Congress followed a different but equally principled route. After graduating from Rhodes College and the University of Houston Law Center, Crockett built her career as a civil rights attorney in Texas, representing clients who often lacked access to justice. Her legal work focused on expanding educational opportunities for underserved communities and addressing systemic barriers to economic mobility. Representative Crockett approaches public service through the lens of problem-solving, her former law partner told the Texas Tribune. She's interested in identifying concrete obstacles people face and developing practical solutions. After winning her seat in Congress in 2022, Crockett had surprised many by requesting assignment to the Education and Workforce Committee rather than more high-profile committees that might offer greater media attention. When asked why, she explained simply, "Education transformed my life. I want to ensure that same ladder of opportunity remains strong for every child." During her first term, Crockett had maintained a notably substantive focus. Rather than engaging in the performative politics that often dominates freshman representatives' approaches, she had immersed herself in the details of education policy, meeting with experts, visiting schools in her district, and developing relationships with colleagues across the aisle. What made Murray's recognition particularly meaningful was that the two women had no obvious political connection. They represented different generations, different regions, and served in different chambers. Murray had no apparent political incentive to single out Crockett from among dozens of Democratic representatives. Yet those who had observed both women's careers recognized a shared commitment to substance over spectacle, a focus on achieving tangible results, rather than merely generating headlines. The Education Policy Conference had brought them together because both had played key roles in developing the Rural Education Opportunity Act, legislation designed to expand resources for schools in underserved rural communities. Murray had championed the Senate version, while Crockett had worked tirelessly in the House to build bipartisan support. What neither woman knew as they entered the Kennedy caucus room that morning was that their brief interaction would not only highlight their shared dedication to principled public service, but would inspire a new generation of leaders watching from around the country. What moments of meaningful recognition have you witnessed in your life? Share your stories in the comments below about times when genuine acknowledgment made a difference in someone's journey. After her opening acknowledgment of Crockett, Senator Murray turned to the podium to begin her formal address on education policy. The room expected her to move on to the scheduled agenda, but Murray again departed from expectations. I want to take a few minutes to highlight specifically why Representative Crockett's work on education deserves our attention, Murray continued, setting her prepared remarks aside. Because in a political environment that often rewards volume over substance, her approach offers an important model for effective public service. The C-SPAN cameras captured Crockett's expression of surprise deepening as Murray began detailing specific aspects of her work that few outside the education policy community would have noticed. When the Rural Education Opportunity Act was struggling to gain traction in the House, Murray explained, Representative Crockett didn't resort to public attacks or partisan rhetoric. Instead, she did something increasingly rare. She listened. Murray described how Crockett had organized a series of roundtable discussions, bringing together rural educators from both Democratic and Republican districts. Rather than imposing her own solutions, she had created a space where teachers, administrators, and parents could share their frontline experiences. The bill we passed last month includes provisions directly shaped by those conversations, Murray noted. Representative Crockett made sure that the legislation reflected the actual needs of rural communities rather than Washington assumptions about what those communities need. Murray then highlighted 3 specific contributions Crockett had made to the legislation that had received almost no public attention, but had significantly strengthened its impact. First, Crockett had identified a technical flaw in the funding formula that would have unintentionally directed resources away from the highest need districts. Her attention to these unglamorous details had ensured the bill would actually serve its intended beneficiaries. Second, she had worked with Republican colleagues to incorporate accountability measures that both protected taxpayer resources and provided schools flexibility to address local needs, finding the elusive middle ground that allowed for bipartisan support. Third, and most significantly, Crockett had championed provisions specifically addressing teacher retention in rural communities, drawing on her conversations with educators who had identified housing costs and professional isolation as key barriers. None of these contributions generated headlines, Murray noted. Representative Crockett didn't issue press releases or post videos about these technical improvements. She simply did the work, motivated not by recognition, but by results. As Murray spoke, the room's atmosphere noticeably shifted. Staffers who had been checking phones looked up, recognizing they were witnessing something authentic rather than staged. Journalists who had come expecting routine policy announcements began taking detailed notes. In my 30 years in the Senate, Murray continued, I've learned that the most effective public servants aren't always the most visible. They're the ones who do their homework, build relationships across differences, and focus on making government work better for the people it serves. Murray then shared something personal that surprised even those who had worked with her for years. "When I was a young state senator," she said, "a senior colleague took the time to recognize work I had done on a child care bill. That recognition didn't just make me feel appreciated, it reminded me why public service matters, especially when the day-to-day work feels thankless." Murray looked directly at Crockett. "Today, I want to pay that forward, because acknowledging substantive achievement isn't just about the individual being recognized. It's about reminding all of us, especially the next generation of leaders, what genuine public service looks like." The camera caught the reactions of college students attending the conference as part of a congressional internship program. Their expressions revealed something powerful. Seeing this genuine moment of recognition across generational and chamber divides was reshaping their understanding of what political leadership could be. As Murray concluded her remarks about Crockett and prepared to turn to the policy agenda, something unexpected happened. The room spontaneously erupted in applause, not the perfunctory clapping that typically follows official speeches, but genuine appreciation for this reminder of what public service at its best can be. The Washington Post reporter seated in the front row would later write that this moment cut through the cynicism that permeates modern political coverage, offering a glimpse of the authentic commitment to public good that still exists beneath the partisan theater that dominates headlines. What no one anticipated was how Crockett would respond, or how that response would transform what might have been a merely pleasant recognition into something with lasting impact for aspiring public servants across the country. After concluding her formal policy address, Senator Murray opened the floor for questions. As the session ended, attendees gathered in small groups for the networking that typically follows such events. Many approached Crockett to congratulate her on Murray's unexpected recognition. Photographers captured the moment when Murray made her way across the room to speak directly with Crockett. Rather than the brief handshake typical of such public interactions, the two women engaged in an earnest conversation that lasted nearly 15 minutes. "What struck me was the genuine nature of their exchange," noted Dr. Margaret Chen, director of the Congressional Fellowship Program, who observed the interaction. "This wasn't a photo opportunity. It was a senior leader taking time to engage meaningfully with a junior colleague." Later that afternoon, Murray had a long-standing commitment to meet with student leaders from Washington State universities visiting the Capitol. When she invited Crockett to join her for this session, what might have been a routine meeting transformed into something extraordinary. Gathered in the historic Senate reception room, 20 students expected a standard presentation about careers in government. Instead, they witnessed an unscripted conversation between two lawmakers that revealed the human dimension of public service rarely visible in media coverage. "Representative Crockett, would you share with these students how you approach building relationships with colleagues who have very different political views?" Murray asked, setting aside the typical talking points such sessions usually involve. Crockett's response revealed both vulnerability and wisdom that immediately connected with the students. "When I first arrived in Congress," Crockett acknowledged, "I felt tremendous pressure to make my mark through confrontation. Cable news and social media reward the loudest voices, the most divisive statements." She paused, considering her words carefully. "But I remembered why I ran for office in the first place, not to be on television, but to create opportunities for communities like the one I grew up in. That meant focusing on what could actually be accomplished, not just what would generate attention." Crockett described how she had intentionally sought out relationships with representatives from rural districts whose political views often differed dramatically from her own. "I didn't approach those conversations trying to change their fundamental beliefs or values," she explained. "I started by listening, by asking what their communities needed, by finding the human connection beneath the political labels." One student asked about handling public criticism, noting the harsh treatment many lawmakers face on social media. "That's one of the hardest parts of public service today," Crockett acknowledged. "The constant pressure to respond to criticism by escalating conflict rather than focusing on the work." Murray nodded in agreement. When I entered the Senate in 1992, we didn't have Twitter or cable news demanding constant reaction. That allowed more space for the substantive relationship building that legislation requires. How do you handle that pressure now? The student pressed. Murray's response carried the wisdom of her decades in public life. I remind myself daily why I'm here, not to win news cycles, but to improve people's lives. That means sometimes accepting criticism rather than responding in kind, especially when engaging would distract from the actual work. As the conversation continued, students witnessed something remarkable. Two public servants from different generations sharing not talking points, but authentic reflections on the challenges and rewards of principled leadership. When another student asked about work-life balance, Crockett shared how she maintained her sense of purpose through connection with her district. Every weekend when I return home, I visit a school in my district, she explained. Not for cameras or press, but to remind myself who I'm working for. The students who need pathways to opportunity, the teachers who deserve support, the communities counting on education as a foundation for economic mobility. What made this exchange particularly powerful was its departure from the scripted interactions that typically characterize public officials' appearances. Both Murray and Crockett spoke with remarkable candor about the gap between public perceptions of political life and the daily reality of trying to create meaningful change. As the meeting concluded, a freshman from Washington State University asked perhaps the most important question. With all the dysfunction we see in politics, why should we consider public service as a career? Murray looked at Crockett, then back to the student. Because despite everything you see on the news, there are still people like Representative Crockett who approach this work with integrity, who focus on results rather than recognition, who remember that at its core, public service is about making government work better for the people who need it most. Crockett added, and because change happens through the work of people who show up not for glory or power, but with the patience and persistence to improve systems from within. As the students departed, many lingered to speak individually with both lawmakers. What had been scheduled as a routine meeting had become a master class in principled public service. The impact extended far beyond those physically present. Several students shared reflections on social media that quickly gained attention for their hopeful tone amid typically cynical political discourse. Today I witnessed something I didn't think existed anymore. Public officials motivated by service rather than self-promotion, wrote Maya Johnson, a political science major. It's changed how I think about my own future in ways I'm still processing. Later that evening, as video clips from the student session circulated online, they sparked conversations across political lines about what genuine public service should look like. Conversations that focused not on partisan divisions, but on shared values of integrity, respect, and commitment to the common good. The immediate aftermath of Senator Murray's recognition and the subsequent mentorship moment with students revealed how hunger for authentic leadership transcends political divisions. Within days, video clips of both Murray's formal recognition and the more intimate student session had been viewed over 7 million times across platforms. What made the response particularly notable was its cross-partisan nature. I don't agree with either Murray or Crockett politically, wrote a conservative commentator, but I respect their focus on substance over spectacle. We need more of that on all sides. Progressive voices similarly acknowledged the power of this model. In an era when performative politics dominates social media, noted podcast host Maria Sanchez, seeing two women focused on unglamorous policy work reminds us what government should actually be about. Educational organizations particularly emphasize the mentorship dynamic between Murray and Crockett. The National Education Association highlighted their exchange as an example of leadership that crosses generational lines to strengthen democratic institutions. But the most significant impact came through the ripple effects that extended far beyond Washington. 1 month after the Kennedy Caucus Room recognition, a remarkable initiative began taking shape on college campuses nationwide. Inspired by the Murray-Crockett exchange, student government associations from schools across the political spectrum launched Common Ground Conversations, structured dialogues focused on identifying shared values beneath political differences. What struck me about that moment between Senator Murray and Representative Crockett was that it wasn't about compromising principles, explained James Henderson, student body president at a southeastern university. It was about recognizing that different perspectives can contribute to better outcomes when there's mutual respect. These campus initiatives explicitly rejected the confrontational model of political engagement that dominated media coverage, focusing instead on the substantive approach both Murray and Crockett exemplified. 3 months later, when Crockett returned to her district for a town hall meeting at a local community college, she was approached by Teresa Mendez, a high school government teacher who had shown her students the video of the student session with Murray. "Those students watched that exchange a dozen times," Mendez told Crockett. "They've started a Solutions First Club at school where they practice discussing controversial issues by beginning with shared goals rather than partisan positions." Similar stories emerged across the country as educators used the Murray-Crockett exchange as a teaching tool for civic education. Rather than focusing on political conflict, these lessons emphasized how effective governance requires building relationships across differences while maintaining principled commitment to substantive goals. 6 months after their initial exchange, Murray and Crockett participated in a joint interview for the PBS series Democracy in Practice. When asked about the unexpected impact of their interaction, Murray's response revealed why the moment had resonated so widely. "What we modeled wasn't exceptional. It was just authentic," Murray explained. "Throughout my career, I've seen that most people in public service, regardless of party, are trying to make government work better for their constituents. That basic commitment gets lost in coverage that emphasizes conflict over cooperation." Crockett added, "Senator Murray's recognition reminded me that the most important work often happens away from cameras. The provisions in that education bill that will help students in rural communities won't make headlines, but they'll make a difference in real lives. That's the measure that matters." The interview explored how both women navigated the pressure to engage in performative politics while maintaining focus on substantive achievement. "There's tremendous pressure on elected officials to perform outrage rather than pursue results," Murray acknowledged. "Resisting that pressure requires regularly reconnecting with why you sought office in the first place." Crockett nodded. "I keep a folder of letters from people in my district whose lives have been improved by policies I've worked on. When I'm tempted to engage in the outrage cycle, I read those letters to remind myself what actually matters." Perhaps the most significant legacy of their exchange emerged when Murray announced the creation of the Public Service Mentorship Initiative, a bipartisan program pairing experienced lawmakers with junior colleagues across party lines. What began as a spontaneous moment of recognition has evolved into a structured effort to strengthen governance through meaningful mentorship, Murray explained at the program's launch. "Because democracy depends not just on who wins elections, but on how those entrusted with power approach their responsibilities." The program explicitly focused on the unglamorous aspects of governance: how to draft effective legislation, build coalitions, and navigate institutional structures to achieve concrete results. Participants committed to monthly meetings without staff or media present, creating space for authentic exchange across partisan and generational lines. When asked why she had initiated this program as she approached the end of her long Senate career, Murray's response captured the essential lesson of her exchange with Crockett. "Democracy isn't sustained primarily through grand gestures or inspiring speeches," she reflected. "It's sustained through the patient, persistent work of people who focus on solving problems rather than scoring points. My hope is that this initiative helps cultivate that approach across partisan lines." 1 year after their initial Kennedy caucus room interaction, Murray invited Crockett to join her for a special event at her alma mater, Washington State University. Speaking to graduating seniors, they offered reflections on public service that demonstrated how their relationship had evolved from a moment of recognition into a genuine partnership across generational and institutional lines. Murray spoke first, acknowledging the cynicism many young people feel about political institutions. "That skepticism isn't unreasonable given what you see in media coverage," she told the graduates. But beneath the conflict that dominates headlines, there are still people in government motivated by genuine commitment to improving lives and strengthening communities. She gestured to Crockett. Representative Crockett exemplifies what public service should be about, not seeking attention, but focusing on results that make a meaningful difference in people's lives. When Crockett stepped to the podium, her message to the graduates revealed how deeply she had been influenced by Murray's mentorship. The most important lesson I've learned through Senator Murray's example is that genuine leadership often means foregoing recognition to achieve results, she explained. The choice isn't between maintaining your principles and working effectively within institutions. The real challenge is pursuing your principles through patient, persistent engagement with the complex work of governance. As they concluded their remarks, Murray offered the wisdom accumulated through her decades of public service. Throughout history, democracy has been sustained not primarily by those who make the loudest statements or generate the most attention, she told the graduates. It's sustained by those who approach public service with humility, persistence, and genuine commitment to the common good. Crockett added, and by those who recognize that beneath our deepest political differences lie shared aspirations for our communities and country, aspirations that can only be realized when we approach governance not as a battle to be won, but as a responsibility to be fulfilled. Their message to these future leaders emphasized that true public service requires both principled commitment and practical wisdom, the courage to stand firm on core values combined with the humility to listen to different perspectives and build common ground where possible. As the students rose in standing ovation, many were visibly moved by this alternative vision of political leadership, one focused not on conflict, but on the patient, persistent work of making government function effectively for those it serves. This is the kind of principled leadership America needs now more than ever. Leadership that measures success not by attention generated, but by lives improved, not by battles won, but by progress achieved, not by divisions deepened, but by common ground discovered. If you found this story of genuine public service inspiring, please like and subscribe for more content that highlights how principled leadership can strengthen our democratic institutions. Together, we can support a vision of politics focused not on conflict but on the shared work of building a more perfect union.